Welcome to the A Monday Moment with Dr. Mal podcast, where each week I, Dr. Mal, share life lessons and motivation to kickstart your Monday. Whether you're starting your day or winding down, join me or me and my future guest for a burst of positivity and a fresh perspective. Let's make Mondays meaningful together. Greetings and happy Monday, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Mallory D. McCoy, and welcome to this week's episode of A Monday Moment with Dr. Mal. As always, may this broadcast bring you what you need in the present moment. May my light exude positivity and kindness, and may my love be extended to all who could use a little extra. Ashe. Let's seize the moment. This week's show is titled Hablas Español, so let's get straight to it. Vamos. The first thing I want to say is, if you've traveled to Mexico and stayed at a resort and did all the touristy things the resort suggested, then yes, your feet have been planted in Mexico, but you haven't really experienced Mexico because there are layers to this. When people travel to places like Cancun, Riviera Maya, Cozumel, Playa del Carmen, or Tulum, they've visited the Mexican state of Quintana Roo, a region intentionally designed to cater to foreigners. It's commercialized, curated, and centered around comfort because that's how the economy there survives. And that was me. Before I moved to Mérida, I had visited Cozumel twice, Cancun, Playa del Carmen, and Riviera Maya in the past. I confidently said I've been to Mexico, but now after living in the Yucatan state for almost 2 months, I can say I've truly been to Mexico. And here's how I know. My number one indicator is when you have to use the language of the people to survive. That's how you know. To give you a little background about my journey in Spanish and Mexican culture, I've studied languages since I was a child. In elementary school, I was in a gifted program, and through that program, I was introduced to French. And all I remember now from that experience is a song about fish and head, shoulders, knees, and toes in French. But it planted a seed in me because in middle school, I started learning Spanish through that same program. And in high school, I wanted to take Spanish 1 through Spanish 4. Spanish came easier for me than French because I'm good at recognizing patterns, and French is a pattern language, but Spanish to me just made more sense. And honestly, if I could compare it to what type of pattern it is, I would compare it to algebra. Spanish and algebra are literally the same thing for me and how my mind works. You may not see the connection, but my brain absolutely does. Being in choir helped too. We sang in many different languages, both in ensemble settings and as a soloist for contests. Learning different ways to communicate opens your mind and expands your ability to acquire language skills in real life. So when I went to college as a choral music education major, my voice teachers challenged me to sing in multiple languages. I loved Italian because I was already privy to that from high school. I learned to appreciate and love German. German's such a harsh language, but the music is so beautiful. I hated French because I don't have a natural nasal sound. And while I didn't sing much in Spanish due to limited access to Spanish arias, for my senior recital, I did choose a set of 3 Spanish arias, and I opened my recital with them. And I can't think of their name right now, but they were so beautiful, yet challenging, very, very challenging to sing. I also attempted to minor in Spanish in college. I completed 6 credit hours in Spanish, but the remaining credits would require an immersion program, and I simply just didn't have the financial access to make that happen while living on student loans. Still, I remember my Spanish professor, his name was Luis. One afternoon, I spent hours in his office listening to Spanish and French records. He had like a record set and a record player in his office. The reason why I was listening to the music was not only because I was majoring in music, but there was one song that he wanted to share with me, and it was named Mallory, but it was a French singer that was female, and she was singing about a boy. And so that's when I learned that my name is unisex. And in French, it's actually a masculine name that means unlucky. Lucky for me, I've never felt unlucky. Mallory was released in 1965, and he had that record. So that day still stays with me. Fast forward to now, today marks my 200th day Spanish streak on Duolingo. Y aprendo más rápido en Ubers. I learned so much Spanish in Ubers. So when I researched Mérida, not only was I attracted to the city because it's statistically the second safest city in the whole North America, but also I knew it was a local traditional city, and that if I wanted to truly live here, I need to know more Spanish than the average traveler. What I didn't anticipate was how much more I need to know because it's not just about language, it's also about culture. Here in the Yucatan, Spanish is blended with Mayan language influences, and Spanish here sounds different depending on who you're talking to. And add in slang and regional expressions and conversational shortcuts, and suddenly the Spanish I learned in high school and college feels very formal. Actually, it feels very Spanish oriented, like Spanish as in Spain, not Spanish as in Mexican. It kind of reminds me of when I traveled to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and how even though the people there spoke English, I struggled to understand what they were saying because it was not an that I could understand. That realization has humbled me for sure. Living here has also deepened my empathy in ways that I didn't expect. I used to think I somewhat understood what it meant to navigate the world through a language barrier until I had to do it myself. I think about all the students that I've had over the years, brilliant children from other countries who were expected not only to learn English, but to prove what they have learned in the past through English. So watching them perform on standardized tests and given accommodations because they couldn't perform well in English, their intelligence was often underestimated simply because language stood in the way. Tell me a world where that makes any sense, because it doesn't. I'll be waiting forever. And even more so, it's given me a deeper empathy for my son. When I tell people that he's autistic, I find myself often following up with, but he's also intelligent, because people question his intelligence the moment that they find out he's autistic without even saying it. Telepathy is the language that he uses most naturally. And since people aren't tapped into their own telepathic abilities that we all have, by the way, they expect him to communicate in the way they feel comfortable. And I can honestly say this as his mother and as someone who has spent every day with him since August. I'm not even sure I fully understand the extent of his knowledge because he knows so much more than what I know that he knows. And now he's at least multilingual because he understands English, he understands some Spanish, and he uses some American Sign Language. His niñera speaks Spanish to him, and so do I. And when I enroll him in school here next fall, he'll learn even more Spanish. And what many people don't realize is that every language has their own system of sign language too. So when he learns signs in Spanish, he'll be bilingual in sign language too, or trilingual. Because there's so many layers and multiple variations of all the languages that I just named. And then there's this. He telepathically communicates in English, but what happens when he learns to telepathically communicate in Spanish too? Like, where does it end? Does it even end? And maybe the better question is, why do we assume it has to? So learning about the different ways to communicate has simply been incredible for me and has helped me to dive deeper into my own thought processes around how we communicate. Yet one of the most disturbing things that I've heard here came from an Uber driver who told me that someone gave him a low rating because he didn't speak English well. And to that, I say, foreigners, leave your white supremacist ways out of Mexico. And that's just not for people who identify as white. This is for everybody because we've all been conditioned by white supremacy and we've been compliant to it. That's how it continues and that's how it perpetuates. But for real, how are you going to enter a country where Spanish is spoken and expect the locals to learn your language when you're not even willing to learn theirs? Make that make sense. So what I'm about to say needs no mincing. If Mexicans speaking Spanish in their own country bothers you, go home. Or better yet, learn the language if you want to remain here. In my experience, they've been incredibly kind and eager to help. I now have many phone numbers of several Uber drivers and just people who are like, do you want to practice? I'd be more than happy to practice with you. I even connected with an Uber driver who's a local music teacher here, and he invited Raymond and I to his school, which is in our neighborhood. We haven't been to the school yet, but just to know that we've been extended that offer from a complete stranger from another land is exactly the level of kindness that I'm talking about. It's top tier kindness. Another moment of humility came when I realized how many nationalities live here and how they all speak Spanish. I know that we all live everywhere in the world, so I don't know why I was so surprised to see other nationalities speak Spanish. And it hasn't been brown folks that speak Spanish. It hasn't been white people that speak Spanish. For me, it was an Asian couple. They walked into the dentist office that I was in and they were speaking fluent Spanish. But of course they speak Spanish because we live in a Spanish speaking area and anyone can speak any language regardless of what they look like. But in Missouri, where I'm from, Asians spoke Vietnamese and some English, but these Asians weren't speaking English at the time. I don't know if they don't speak English at all or not, but I mean, I had to check my ignorance and assumptions in that moment because I don't know why that didn't make sense to me. And then at my chiropractor's office, the receptionist is a Black woman, but I overheard her speaking English, so I started speaking English to her and she responded. But also I learned she's from Haiti and speaks French and Spanish, and she's just able to flow in and out of languages so freely. Listening to her navigate conversations between different clients is actually impressive. She's not speaking Spanglish, she's speaking English only, then Spanish only, then French only on the phone with her family. My mind was incredibly blown. You can tell I haven't been anywhere, so I'm changing that as we speak. Another thing I didn't think about before I moved down here was about what happens in an emergency situation. I was actually in a situation where I had to know more Spanish than I knew, but I didn't know. And so it made me a whole lot more anxious about the situation. I talked about this in my last episode, but on Christmas Day, 2025, I moved twice in 48 hours. The Airbnb I was moving into had mold and mildew, so we needed to get out of there. But before that, the fletes, the movers that I hired, didn't speak a lick of English. And we ended up broke down on the side of the highway because they had a flat tire and with all of my belongings in the back with my son. And we were out in the sun. And as I look back on that moment, I've realized how blessed we were because I moved on Christmas Day, but the Mexicans celebrate Christmas on Christmas Eve. And so the world wasn't completely shut down that day as it is in the United States. But I was also in an unfamiliar area. And like I said, my son was in the heat. And thankful for Google Translate, internet access, and Uber because those technologies got us through that moment, but it was still hard. Then, not too long ago, my son had severe gas pains. So when he started crying, I considered calling emergencies. I knew the number was 113, but I froze, wondering what I would say on the phone because I was used to using WhatsApp to type in English and then translate. So I probably could have figured it out, but it would have been difficult. These experiences that I just named made something super clear. Immersion is powerful, but preparation matters too. So here's a question for you. Where in your life are you being asked to learn a new language? Maybe it's not Spanish. Maybe it's the language of boundaries, of grief, of rest, of love, of self-trust. What if the discomfort you're feeling isn't punishment, but initiation? And what if survival isn't about fluency, but about willingness? And I also want you to consider this. Despite language barriers, There are universal languages that exist everywhere in the world, and they are free. Kindness, compassion, empathy, love, a smile. These languages cross borders effortlessly. And while the opposite also exists, leading with these almost always opens doors. They cost nothing to give and they cost nothing to carry. So that's it for me. As always, thank you for spending this moment with me. If this episode resonated with you, sit with it. You don't have to rush to do anything. Just notice what's stirring in your soul. And remember, I'll see you in 2 weeks for another Monday Moment with Dr. Mal. So until then, love and peace to all of you. Have the best week. Thank you for tuning in for a Monday Moment with Dr. Mal, now proudly a part of the Alive Podcast Network. You can find this show on the Live Podcast Network website and app, and you can find this podcast streaming across your favorite podcast streaming platforms. If you love to have the visual, you can tune into my YouTube channel, When Mallory Lives, to see this show and catch up on all my shows from the beginning.